Good afternoon, and welcome to today's discussion between the Herald and Grand Forks Public Schools Superintendent Terry Brenner. I'm Corey Wenzel, publisher of the Herald. This event is being live broadcast on grandforksherald.com, and it will be available there for later viewing shortly after its conclusion. These are unprecedented times, and it's probably impossible that all questions related to coronavirus and COVID-19 can be answered. But the point is to try and to open up these discussions and invite questions from the public in hopes that confusion and concerns about the virus can be allayed. That's why I'm pleased Dr. Brenner has joined us today.
Thank you very much, Corey. I appreciate the background information for all of our viewers who are viewing now or will watch the delayed recording. Terry Brenner, Superintendent, Grand Forks and Grand Forks Air Force Base School Districts. Happy to provide some responses and information to clear up any confusion across the community about what our process is going to be to start the school year. But maybe just to give a little context to the conversation today, we have surveyed parents and staff on 2 occasions this summer. About 3.5 weeks ago, we surveyed both groups asking for input relative to would they, if they had a choice between 2 options, distance learning being one, face-to-face being another, what would their responses be? And about 3.5 weeks ago, the responses from parents was pretty concrete, about 8%, 8, a single digit number, wanted to keep their student or students at home. And on the staff side, we probably had a handful, 5, 6, 7, 8, with or without a medical certificate who wanted to work remotely for health reasons. Since the COVID-19 uptick in our community and in our region, we decided to survey again to see if those numbers would remain static or they would change. And not to my surprise, as of last night at midnight when the parent survey closed, we're at about 19.4% of parents, so almost 1 in 5 students will remain at home in a distance learning model. The balance of the students will report to a face-to-face model. So that is where we're at today. We have more work to do because there were some families who didn't respond. So we'll spend the next several days, contacting them. We don't want to make assumptions that they're going to show up face-to-face. We need to know exactly where every student is going to be when we open up on August 31st.
So Dr. Brenner, as you know, we opened this up for readers to submit questions. The plan today is to go about 20 or 25 minutes, and we'll see how many we can get through. I'll start. With some students and families electing to do distance and online learning, and the possibility for more students having to return to remote learning if there should be an outbreak within a school, are the schools adequately staffed to ensure technology support to all students, teachers, and parents, or anyone who may be responsible to assist students with learning on devices?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Corey. We're in a much better position this fall than we were last spring. I think everybody knows we had about 8 business days to plan for remote learning to get technology devices into the hands of all of our students, of which we were successful doing. We've used some of the CARES Act, now known as ESSER funds, to build a more robust technology device system with infrastructure and back support or help on the backside, I should say. So between our technicians in our technology department, our instructional design coaches, teachers, and support staff, we're better positioned to provide that technical support if parents or grandparents, guardians, whoever it might be, assisting people in a remote learning environment, will have some of that information to be supportive. We'll also have some documentation and information really on how to navigate some of our systems, whether it's Seesaw at the elementary level or Google Classroom at the middle and high school level. That might be some nice cheat sheet guides for the adults in the household. So we feel like we're in better shape this fall going into it. And the second part of my response to that question is for students who are coming to campus in a face-to-face model, we're going to spend our first several days on some of the most important aspects of education. The first of all, it's the relationship between students and teacher, and also the social emotional learning aspect that was not completely addressed during our distance learning model last spring. So we want to really focus on that, relationships. And the second piece is if we have to pivot to online learning for everybody, we want to make sure that digital competency is really something that's discussed in that first week in case we have to move quickly into that learning, that remote learning environment. So that will give everybody a better advantage in starting out this school year.
As the district plans for backup teachers, and if it has to expand staff to accommodate all of the scenarios, what happens if some of those staff members get sick, and where will those replacements come from?
Well, the replacements would, first of all, come from our substitute teacher list. We have a fairly good number of substitute teachers. We have reached out to them with the similar surveys that I referenced earlier, just to see if all would be returning. There are a few, with some underlying health conditions who would not want to work in a face-to-face model, but would be, willing to be assisting in our distance learning model. So that's where we would start. And then if we're really short teachers, whether it's face-to-face or distance learning, we'll go to our applicant pool. People who have applied for jobs with us, typically if they make it to the table for an interview, those 4, 5, 6 people, those are usually pretty high caliber folks. So we feel like that's a resource that we can tap. And finally, with our online learning platform, which is a vendor called Edmentum, we can provide that curriculum, that online curriculum, and we can provide the teacher, or we can pay a little bit more and hire a teacher who would work remotely. So somebody not on our staff, but a teacher from somewhere else in the country would actually facilitate that course.
Okay. Can you explain the rationale behind block scheduling at the middle and high schools? And can you give specific reasons that explain how block scheduling helps prevent the spread of COVID-19?
Well, it minimizes it. It's not going to prevent it totally. With the block schedule, we'll have students enrolled in 4 classes per day rather than 7 or 8. So really what it does is it minimizes the transition within a building. So from a health and safety perspective, that was the rationale behind that. I will share with the viewers that block scheduling is not a new concept. It's something that has already been implemented at community high school with a tremendous amount of success. It doesn't work for everybody. We know that, and not one learning strategy, instructional strategy, or learning environment works for every one of our students. But it's something that we've wanted to expand that pilot a little bit further at our high school campuses. It gives instructors a bit more time, because they'll have just short of a 2-hour block in a specific content area. So there's more time for student collaboration, project-based learning, and probably the most critical aspect is there's more time for teacher feedback. So let's just say a student is involved in practicing an activity, practicing a problem, whatever it might be. We want students to practice perfectly rather than practicing imperfectly, because it's so hard to unlearn something that's been learned the incorrect way. That would also mirror a little bit of the asynchronous model, the distance learning model, where students have an applicable amount of time to complete their work. So in that asynchronous model, there's going to be a video uploaded of the lesson, and then the student is going to have a day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it might be. So there's more comparability within the distance learning piece and the face-to-face with block scheduling. But to say that it's going to actually eradicate any COVID spread because of that model, that wouldn't be accurate, but we feel like it might minimize it to some degree.
Should a hybrid instructional format be considered during the academic year if virus levels reach a higher level in the community versus just having face-to-face or online-only options? The reader gives an example. For example, students with the last names A through M on Monday and Thursday, and LZ on Tuesday and Friday, with all other days online. Using this method, the reader says, you could reduce headcount and exposure, and there's a midpoint instructional model between the 2 current models.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And when we started our planning for this school year, when we started it way back at the end of May and early June, this was one of the features that we discussed. It was actually one of our 4 models that we were really working on and vetting. And it's highly likely that we could end up pivoting and going to that model. We're positioned to do it. We know how to do it. And I'm just taking a look at my notes in preparing for this question. We knew that with that kind of a model, we knew that there were going to be some cleaning challenges between students. So we're having different kinds of exposure within the building, and we're looking at what some European countries were doing with that, and they were moving away from it. That doesn't mean it's the right answer. It doesn't mean it's the wrong answer. But I will say that the short answer to the question is, if we need to pivot to that model, we will pivot to that model. If we have space issues, capacity issues, based on some extenuating circumstances, what we now know, here's a pretty good little update for this question. On Monday, yesterday, we activated teacher key fobs. Not that they're under contract, but we've got a lot of teachers coming into the buildings now, and they're assessing their classrooms. So while we did our own metric of measuring all of the rooms and saying we've got capacity for X amount of students, now that teachers are in their space and realizing what they've got to take out of their room, what they can have in their room, what they can't have in their room, and the amount of teaching space that they need, we've got some challenges in front of us. So, and we're going to listen to the boots on the ground. And I don't want to be speaking like a general here, but the boots on the ground are the people who really see, feel, touch, and understand what's happening at the classroom level. And when they give us that kind of feedback, we're going to listen and we're going to make some adjustments.
As major sports teams, examples being the St. Louis Cardinals, the Miami Marlins, battle COVID-19, do you have a strong belief that a season, say football season, can actually be played with any sort of normalcy? And also, is there a threshold where the plug will be pulled on a team season?
Well, normalcy from a practice perspective and all of the guidelines that Mark Rarick, athletic director, has implemented with coaches, it is not normal. And I happen to be close to the Red River football opening practice yesterday because of where a meeting was held. And they were doing the social distancing within the confines of the skills that they were doing. To the point of an actual game when we're suited up and there's contact, and some people can say, well, that contact wasn't for 15 minutes, within 6 feet, but over the course of a game, there's a lot of contact, and there are a lot of bodily fluids that have the potential to be shared. So I think it's going to be a challenge for a game like football to be sustained throughout the season. We certainly hope that our kids can play the entire season, because there are certainly benefits for our student athletes, athletics, and extracurricular activities. As a former participant in all sports, I can say that it's been a great part of my personal development. But as a contact sport, I think that's going to be one of the difficult ones. The High School Activity Association came out with a statement basically just giving local control that opportunity to proceed with athletics or not. And some of the conversations that we've had, and Mark Rarick also addressed this at the last 2 school board meetings, if we did not have athletics, all sports, notwithstanding football, would probably find kind of a club sport, and parents would facilitate that, sponsor that, and they would be traveling, and it would be all out of our jurisdiction. We have a little more control. If there are sports, we're providing the busing, we're spacing kids on buses, and this is a lot different than collegiate athletics as well. So we're very well aware of what's happening around us and what's happening across the country. College athletics, that usually requires traveling out of state. It's usually on an airplane. Hotels are involved, and they can't always control where they're going. They might be going to a hot spot, whereas with high school athletics, we've already trimmed back some of the travel that we would have done. We won't have overnight travel. Girls volleyball team will not be in the Bismarck-Mandan area this fall for an overnight tournament. We can control our busing, and we can control where the games are being played. And also with that, there's been a really robust conversation about fans in the stands and where we're at from a COVID activity level. And I think there was maybe a misunderstanding, or what was portrayed in the media this morning, both TV and newspaper, is we actually have 3 levels that we're looking at. Excuse me, if we're in the green level, which means low COVID activity, we would allow 50% of fan attendance at all of our venues. If we're in the yellow, then we're going to restrict that to a certain number of tickets per student athlete, whatever that number is, whether we land on 2, whether we land on 4. We want to make sure that that's palatable for all of our families. Some of our families are blended families, and we don't want to exclude. But when we're in the orange and we're seeing that 10% or greater number of COVID activity, using kind of our local data, we would not have fans in the stands. And that just gives us the likelihood of sustaining a sports season a little bit longer than if we don't have some of those metrics in place.
And that's, as an aside to that, when you talk about the data, that's community data and not school data?
Yeah, that would be community data, and we're going to increase those data points, not just looking at that 10%, but we want to look at, what's hospitalization, what are the death rates, what's community spread, and defining community spread and what falls under community spread, what's happening in the household. But if we have, COVID identification within an athletic team, that team will be shut down and will be quarantined for a period of time. We do have systems in place for each of our teams.
And that was the secondary part of that question as well, is there a threshold where the plug will be pulled? And is the threshold one?
The threshold is one, and where people are going to be quarantined, and then we'll go through the whole testing process and see how that shakes out, and then when the team can come back together. The other thing that coaches are doing within those practice environments are, they're developing cohorts within those larger numbers. So let's just say it's girls volleyball practice. They're going to be certain players who are going to be working together on skills and development. So there's not going to be a lot of rotation between a number of students, and they'll isolate that way, they'll travel that way, and we're just going to try to contain things within the team, right down to team meetings. There won't be team meetings in locker rooms, but there'll be Zoom team meetings. So there's been a lot of creativity and innovation that our coaches are doing and following many of the guidelines that have been put in place already, including masks for coaches.
Will the teams mask up on buses and places like that?
Yeah, if they can't physically distance, they will mask up.
Okay. What can the community at large do to support the school and the staff?
That's a great question. I tend to wear my emotions on my sleeve periodically, and this is one time where the community gets to see that. When everybody shows up at our campuses, 7,500 students, 1,500 colleagues, that's about 17% of our community overall. And that doesn't even include all the 14, 15,000 UND students who will be returning here shortly. We feel like we are doing our part with the whole concept of masking up, following all the CDC guidelines, et cetera. We're starting to see other stores across the community requiring masks. And so what would really help us have the opportunity to stay in school longer is if our entire community would mask up. This is not a political statement. This is simply speaking from a medical perspective, that this will give our students and our staff the best opportunity to sustain an educational environment this school year.
I'll finish with this one, which wasn't on the list. And just so the readers and the viewers understand, this isn't a debate. So Dr. Brenner was provided the questions in advance for the sake of thoroughness, not for the sake of a back and forth. But this one wasn't on the list. How is the stress level of the staff there? I mean, how are staff specifically handling this? This must be, it's obviously a burden for so many industries, but at the school, as you're trying to get things organized for the school year, what's the environment like and how are they holding up?
I would say that the stress level is extremely high, particularly for those teachers who have gotten back into their classrooms and have seen what they really have to implement and what they have to put in place to ensure safety. So there are kind of two answers here. One, everybody who wants to come back, and that number is like 95, 96% of our adults want to be back in the buildings. They want to see kids. They want to reconnect. They want to have those relationships, and they want to teach in that environment. But they also know that the reality is they could become sick. And they also know that the reality of that is, family members could become sick, and some people might have, family members with underlying health conditions. So it feels like I'm coming back to work, but there's risk involved in coming back to work. And that's the truth of the matter. So that's something that really has, created some stressful points for many of our adults, and I can understand that. From a leadership perspective, and really just from a humanitarian perspective.
Well, Dr. Brenner, thank you very much for your time today. The hope is maybe we'll do one or two more of these as the school year gets underway. We're working on some scheduling just so people know. This was broadcast live, but readers can also grab it on grandforksherald.com after we finish here today. And so I just wanted to thank you again. Good luck with everything. I realize there's a lot of questions coming your way, but I think things like this really do help. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. The pleasure was mine, and thank you to the Grand Forks Herald and Inform Communications for facilitating this. Appreciate it very much, Corey.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.